Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 210 of The Rock Show. Rob, have we really done 210 shows?
Yeah, episode of the Rock Show. Yes,
Yeah,
210.
unbelievable.
We
Unbelievable.
40 episodes away from 250.
I know. I'm going to have to do another special show for that. Welcome to Black History Month. Okay. And we're going to be talking we're doing two shows this month of The Rock Show, as we always do for February. And we're going to be talking about today the band Thin Lizzy, and particularly Phil Lynott, who was the lead singer and bass player. Next week, 2 weeks, we'll be talking about Stax Records, which was very important in the history of Black music. But today we're going to talk about Phil Lynott and Thin Lizzy. And I kind of took a little liberty with this because maybe people don't think of Thin Lizzy or Phil as really Black. I get that because most people I talk to don't even know what the band looked like. Okay. And Phil Lynott was born in Ireland of an Irish mother, but his father was Black from Guyana. And he had a very interesting life. There aren't too many Irish Black people like that. Not too many that made a big difference in music like he did. So I wanted to kind of stretch things a little bit with Black History Month and bring in Phil Lynott. There he is. I mean, he obviously had Black features. Okay. You can see his cool afro right there. But he was an interesting cat. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 36. He had bad drug problem, alcohol problem, and unfortunately it took his life, like so many musicians that we've talked about over the years. I guess we'll just jump right in, Rob, right?
Yeah, definitely jump right in because this is an interesting.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, were you familiar with Phil at all, or were you just
no? I wasn't really. This is when he started talking about him. I didn't even realize. I thought the guy was white, but he was Black, and they would depict him.
They're one of the most famous bands to ever come out of Ireland. So there's that. Obviously, they would be considered white. The other members were white, but he was of mixed race, and I think that there's a lot can be learned from him, and I think that he also, brought a lot of influence to people. Okay, later on, so many bands covered their songs or were influenced by them. But the story of Phil Lynott, his real name is Philip Parris Lynott, starts in 1949 on August 20th when he was born. Okay, and he was born in the West Midlands area of England, actually. But he grew up in Dublin with his grandparents, all right, which I'll get into. Now, he had a mom named Philomena, okay, who was very close to all his life. And his father was a man named Cecil Parris, and he was from Georgetown, British Guyana. Now, Philomena met Parris, who had moved to the UK to seek work, like so many people in the British colonies did in those days. They had a relationship and for a few months, and Parris ended up being transferred to London, okay, which was a little bit of a distance away from where she was living in the UK. Shortly after, Philomena found herself pregnant and knew it was from Cecil, and she moved with her baby to a home for unmarried mothers in Selly Park. Wow. And that was a common thing for in the 40s and the 50s. And before that, if a woman became pregnant, she was unmarried, they would take her away. She would not be seen during her pregnancy, and she would be taken to a place where she could have the child. Sometimes they were given up for adoption, sometimes not. Okay. He was baptized Catholic on September 4th of 1940. Where am I? 1949. Okay. And she stayed in touch with Cecil, Phil's father, and he often would give child support and things like that to try to help. Philomena actually ended up having 2 more kids, okay, that she gave up for adoption at different points.
Wow.
I don't believe they were from Cecil. Pretty sure not. Okay. Now, in his early years as a toddler and, growing up, he knew he was kind of different than everybody else. but it didn't really come to any issues until he started school. Okay, when he started school in Moss Side, Manchester, England, he ended up having problems where kids were beating him up, with racist attacks and things like that. He was smacked around for being black looking, and this was in England. Okay, so what his mother decided to do was send him to live with her parents in Dublin, in Ireland. Okay. Her parents' names were Frank and Sarah Lynott, and they lived in the area of Crumlin of Dublin. And it was the first time that Phil really had like a father figure in his life. Frank, his grandfather, was important to him and raised him, and he was really very close. His mother stayed back in Manchester, but remained close to her son as she would for his entire life. She later took over the management of the Clifton Grange Hotel in Whalley Range in England with her partner, Dennis Keeley. The hotel, nicknamed The Biz, became popular with show business entertainers and was later referred to in a song by Thin Lizzy's on the debut album. Okay, that's what he was talking about in that song. When he was growing up in Dublin, it worked out for him. He really didn't experience a lot of racism like he had in England.
Yeah.
People were pretty cool about it, that he was of mixed race. So he became kind of popular in school. He was a bit of a clown, and it worked out for him pretty good. But music became a part of his life early on. His uncle Timothy had a fantastic record collection, and he was influenced by Motown music and particularly the Mamas and the Papas. He loved the harmonies of the Mamas and the Papas.
Yeah, you can tell by his style.
Yeah. Now, he joined his first band called the Black Eagles in 1965 as the lead singer. He wasn't playing bass at that point. He was just singing. And they did popular songs. They were basically a cover band, and they played around local areas of Dublin. In those days, in the early 60s, mid 60s, early 60s, late 50s, Dublin was mostly a folk music town. Okay. You didn't have too many like rock bands. That was more coming out of the north of Ireland. Bands like them, Van Morrison's band, and a few others were popular in the north. They did play down in the south. Okay. But there weren't too many rock bands, actual rock bands around the South. Of course, you have the great bands like the Dubliners and stuff like that weren't exactly rock. They were more folk with kind of an edge to it. Okay, a little dangerous edge to it. But really, to be playing like rock cover songs in Dublin at that time was kind of unique. So he had attended the Christian Brothers School in Crumlin, where he became friends with a guy named Brian Downey, who was later persuaded to join the band from the Lifey Beats, they were called. That group fell apart due to the lack of interest of manager Joe Smith, particularly after the departure of his two sons, guitarists Danny and Frankie. Lynott then left the family home and moved into a flat in Clontarf, which is right outside of Dublin, where he briefly joined a group called Kama Sutra. It was in this band, yeah, great name. It was in this band that he learned his frontman skills, how to be a good frontman, and worked out how to interact with an audience. In early 68, he teamed up with bassist Brendan Brush Shields to form a band called Skid Row. Downey was not interested in Shields' request to be the drummer, so the job went to Noel Bridgman. The band signed a deal with Ted Carroll, who would later go on to
Skid Row that played here, or was it different?
Oh, no.
All right.
No, that was the Sebastian Bach.
Yeah, Sebastian Bach. Yeah,
metal band about 20 years later on.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he never knew that it didn't matter. They never recorded anything.
Yeah.
But, so the band signed a deal with Ted Carroll, who would later go on to manage Thin Lizzy, and played a variety of covers, including 8 Miles High by the Byrds, Hey Jude by the Beatles, and several numbers by Jimi Hendrix were in their set. Because Lynott didn't play an instrument at this point in his career, he instead would run his voice through an echo box when he sang. Okay, and he also started to take shoe polish and smear it on under his eyes to give him like this dark look under his eyes, which is something that he continued doing later on, even in Thin Lizzy in later points in his career.
You can see it here in the picture.
Yeah, he's wearing eyeliner there.
Yeah.
But sometimes he would actually do like a Bucky Dent type, baseball thing under his eyes. Sometimes they would like have these like fake fist fights on stage too. Okay, he would fight with shields on stage to kind of create a crowd. In mid '68, guitarist Bernard Cheevers quit to work full time at the Guinness Brewery in Dublin, and was replaced by Belfast-born guitarist Gary Moore. And Gary Moore is another perfect example of what was going on in the north of Ireland at that time with rock guitarists. But he actually came down to Dublin to play with them. Now, despite increased success and the release of one single called New Faces, Old Places, Shields became concerned about Lynott's tendency to sing off-key. So they discovered by going to a doctor that he had a problem with his tonsils. So he subsequently took a leave of absence from the band and got his tonsils out. Okay. And by the time he had recovered, Shields had taken over the band. He had taken over singing. Okay. And reduced the band down to a 3-piece. He felt guilty for what he had done. Okay. But he kind of fired one of his friends, basically. But he ended up teaching Lynott how to play bass, figuring it would be easier than learning guitar. Okay. And he sold him a Fender jazz bass that he had bought from Robert Balog for 36 pounds and started giving him lessons. Now, Lynott and Downey quickly put together a new band called Orphanage. With guitarist Joe Staunton and bassist Pat Quigley. They played a mixture of original material alongside covers of Bob Dylan, the band Free, also did some Jeff Beck songs. Still learning to play bass, Lynott restricted himself to occasional rhythm guitar alongside singing lead. So he was doing a little bit of everything. Interestingly, in 2006, some of this stuff, demos and things that Orphanage and Skid Row had done, actually was found. And they thought they were lost forever, but they ended up finding them, and I believe they've been released. I'm pretty sure. Okay. I'll get into the history of Thin Lizzy here a little bit. 1 second. So, in December of '69, Bell and Wrixon met by chance in a pub in Dublin and found that they shared similar ideas. I'm talking about Eric Wrixon. Okay, he was an organist. Okay, they decided they shared similar ideas about music and wanted to start a band. They visited the Countdown Club, where they saw Phil Lynott and Downey performing with Orphanage. Okay, Lynott was not playing bass at this time, but Bell was particularly impressed by Downey and introduced himself to Lynott and Downey during a break. When Bell asked if they would consider forming a band together, Downey was initially skeptical, but both men were aware of Bell's musical reputation.
Wow.
They agreed that night on condition that Lynott play bass guitar as well as sing, and that the band would perform some of Lynott's originals. So later on, Bell had said, from there on, we were a band. Okay. Wrixon was also included as organist in the as yet unnamed band, making the initial lineup a quartet. The following week, Lynott visited Bell at his flat and played him recordings of some of his own songs. Bell was very impressed, and he said they were so good that he knew right away he could put his guitar style into those songs. The band began to attract attention in the Irish music press almost immediately, as the band began rehearsals in January of 1970. On the 1st of January, New Spotlight magazine announced that Bell and Wrixon were to be part of a new band, By early February, the press had begun to question the delay in any public announcement of this Bell and Lynott supergroup. The name Thin Lizzy was announced to the press on February 18th, 1970. The name came from an idea by Bell about a robot character in what was called the Dandy. It was a comic strip, okay? And the character's name was Tin Lizzy, Tin, which they kind of, liberally adjusted to Thin Lizzy.
Yeah.
Because if you have an Irish accent, you kind of say Thin Lizzy when you
not Tin.
So they said let's add an H to it so people say it right. Okay, so for some of their early gigs, the band were mistakenly promoted as Tin Lizzy or Tin like Lizzy or sometimes Lizzie. The group's first gig was at a school hall in Clogran near the Dublin airport. In 1970, those sources vary on the date. Some say it's the 16th, some say it's the 19th, some say it's the 20th. It's kind of lost to history as to when that first gig was. In July of 70, a few months later, the band released a single called The Farmer, backed with a song called I Need You, on EMI Records, with the B-side written by John Dardis, who owned Trend Studios, where the single was recorded. The single sold just 283 copies. And actually, right now, it's considered quite a collector's item if you have it.
Yeah.
Okay. Wrixon left the band before the single's release, meaning there was a greater share of income for the three remaining members. All 283 copies. He moved to mainland Europe before returning to Belfast, and he rejoined his old band, which was them, the Van Morrison band. Okay. Wrixon would pass away in 2015. Now, by the end of the year, Thin Lizzy was signed to Decca Records by their manager, Brian Tweety, and they traveled to London in January of 1971 to record their self-titled debut album, Thin Lizzy. The album sold pretty well, and it did not chart in the UK despite some airplay and support from John Peel, the famous DJ John Peel. And also another one named Kid Jensen was very into that.
But John Peel, if you are John Peel, people know you.
Oh, yeah. He would spotlight you, and you would become popular. Exactly. Around March of 71, the band permanently relocated to London before the release of the unsuccessful New Day EP in that August. Despite the poor sales, Decca agreed to finance the band's second full album called Shades of a Blue Orphanage, released in March 1972. Like the previous LP, the songs were filled with Lynott's personal anecdotes and references to his life in Dublin and the people he knew there. Musically, the style was Celtic, with little warning of the hard rock direction that the band would take in the future. This album also did not chart in the UK. So they had kind of an Irish rock, not quite rock all the way feel at that point. They hadn't really evolved into the hard rock and boys are back in town kind of thing. Okay. In mid-72, Thin Lizzy was asked to record an album of Deep Purple covers. Vocals and keyboards were handled by members of another band, a band called Elmer Fudd, and a few instrumental tracks composed by the band were also included, including Bell playing the traditional song Danny Boy in the style of Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, that's gotta be.
It's cool.
Have you heard it? I got it.
Yeah, I've heard it. It's very cool. The album was issued as being by the Funky Junction. They didn't use the name Thin Lizzy. It was released as.
Why did they do it like that?
I think they didn't really want to do this, and they didn't want to have their name attached to it. Sometimes when bands aren't selling that good, they try to go under a different name and see what happens, and then go back to like that. So it was released as Funky Junction Play, a tribute to Deep Purple, and it came out in January 1973. But that was really Thin Lizzy. Okay. In late 72, the band embarked upon a high-profile tour of the UK with the Rockin' Slade. Okay, we did a great podcast on them.
Yeah.
And they were in the middle of their big string of hit singles. Also, they toured with Susie Quattro that year.
Ooh,
Another big star at that point. Now, around the same time, Decca Records released Thin Lizzy's version of the traditional Irish ballad "Whiskey in the Jar."
Whiskey in the Jar.
Yeah, as a single, and I think that song epitomizes the band, really, even more than "Boys Are Back in Town" and that album. I don't know. To me, it has that that traditional Irish sound, but it's just such a great rock song the way they do it.
Yeah, that's a great song.
Yeah. Now, at first, the band was pissed off that they got it. It was released as a single. They didn't think it was that good. Okay, and they felt it didn't really capture their image, that song, which I don't agree with that at all. But it topped the Irish charts.
You know what? It wasn't probably didn't see themselves like that kind of band that would do a song like that. So they were like,
yeah. Well, in those days, in those days, I think Irish people in England kind of played down the Irishness a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't want to do a song like that, even though they had done Danny Boy, but it was under a different name.
Yeah.
So, now, like I said, they were angry that it was released, but it topped the Irish charts, and it got to number 6 in the UK in February of '73.
Wow.
Okay. So, I mean, that just shows how many Irish people were in England at that time, to like that. It ended up that they got to be on top of the pops because it went into the top 40. And it also charted in many countries across Europe. However, the follow-up single called Randolph's Tango was a return to Lynott's style, okay, which was a little more obscure, and it really didn't chart in Ireland at all, okay, after that. All right. Chinatown. That's a good one. Okay. The band's next album was called Vagabonds of the Western World, and it was released in September '73. Following strong airplay in the UK, but again, it didn't really chart. Okay. The accompanying single called The Rocker also found little success outside of Ireland, and the momentum gained from their hit single was kind of lost. So they had, Whiskey in the Jar was big.
Yeah.
The next 2-3 things just didn't really pan out. Ireland, they were kind of getting this cult following. Okay, but it really wasn't enough to lift them up.
Yeah.
Towards the end of '73, Eric Bell began to feel constricted with the changing style of the group. They would do like a very hard rock song. Then there was like the Irish stuff, and so he basically was he felt there was less room to kind of do free form jamming that he wanted to do, and he felt they really had to come up with a single right away to make up for what happened with Whiskey in the Jar.
Yeah.
Well, matters with this kind of came to a head during a gig on New Year's Eve in 1973 at the Queen's University in Belfast. He walked off stage halfway through the show and had to be persuaded to finish the set. He just didn't want to play. Okay. The next day he quit the band, and he was immediately replaced by Gary Moore. Okay, who was in that Skid Row lineup with Phil. Okay, and he finished the tour with them. Now Moore stayed until April of 1974. The band recorded 3 songs with him in that time, including the version of "Still in Love with You" that was included on the 4th album called Nightlife. He left the group after being concerned about his health and struggling to compete with Lynott for control, and formed Coliseum 2 with a guy named John Heisman. Okay. Gary Moore would go on to a fantastic guitar career later on and everything, but his few months pretty much with Thin Lizzy was the beginning for him. Also, I think at this point, Lynott was the whole band was partying like crazy. Okay, so I think there was a lot of that going on. He probably couldn't keep up with that.
They were probably getting too fucked up. He's like, I gotta get the hell out of here.
Too locked up. Right. So with the departure of Gary Moore, Lynott decided to expand the lineup with 2 guitarists. Okay, at that point they had 1. All right, and recruited 2 new members to complete a tour of Germany in May of '74. These were ex-Atomic Rooster and Hard Stuff guitarist John Cann and Berlin-born Andy G., who had played with Peter Bardens and Ellis. These are all European bands that didn't really make it over here, but had some success on the continent over there. Okay. This lineup would prove to be temporary, though, as Lynott and Cann did not get along, and G was under contract actually to record with another label, so he couldn't record with them. Okay. The tour was ended early when a disillusioned Downey quit the band and had to be begged to reconsider at a time when Thin Lizzy's contract with Decca was coming to an end. So, a lot of inner turmoil happening in this group.
Yeah, because they had a few members there, if you look at it. And once this guy died, the group continued later on.
Well, yeah, I'll get into that. They did return later on without Phil in the 90s and stuff. And I got to see them, actually. It was pretty cool. But, I wish I would have been able to see them with Phil. He died.
He passed away pretty young, right? He was like 36.
He died in 86. Yeah, he was like 36 years old.
Yeah, he was young.
Which I'll get into. It's very sad. Auditions that were then held, for new members, and Lynott and Downey eventually settled on 18-year-old Glaswegian guitarist Brian Robertson and Californian-born Scott Gorham. Okay, so they had the one American in the band at that point.
Yeah.
The new lineup gelled very quickly, dropped most of the old songs that they had played live, and secured a new record deal with Phonogram. But the resulting album, Nightlife, was a bit of a disappointment for the band due to its soft production and underdeveloped style. Brian Robertson described Ron Nevison's production as pretty naff, which is an insult,
Yes.
Scott Gorham said the record was ridiculously too tame, Like the previous three albums, it also failed to chart, selling around 10,000 copies. Okay, so now we're getting to the time around 1975 when things would start to turn around, In early 75, Thin Lizzy toured the United States for the first time. They'd been around for 5 years already. They never played the States. And Bob Seger and Bachman Turner Overdrive took them on, as an opening band. When BTO toured Europe later in the year to support their hit single, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Thin Lizzy again opened for them, And that was a very high-profile tour. They then recorded the album called Fighting, which became the first Thin Lizzy album to chart in the UK, reaching number 60, although the single did not chart. Opening with Seger's Rosalie, the album Bob Seger, that was a Bob Seger song technically. Yeah. The album showed the first real evidence of that twin guitar sound that they would be known for, and particularly the dual harmonies on the song Wild One, and both guitarists doing solos on the song Suicide. So they had gotten rid of a lot of older songs, kind of developed almost a new sound.
They really did. They really sounded really different. Very strong.
If you listen to the early stuff before that Fighting album, and everything after Fighting would kind of be in that genre for the most part, So they just came up with the right recipe,
Sometimes it takes a while to get the right recipe.
Yeah, and that's another thing with music. In those days, record labels gave you a shot.
Yeah.
You might sign a 3-record deal and 2 records bomb, and the record company doesn't give up on you. That doesn't happen today.
Oh, no.
Which is a shame.
Like a bad habit.
Yeah, it's, because it's all about money and all that. It's a shame. They don't give, even, of course, it was always about money, but at least they had a sense of people developing as artists a little bit, not today. So now, after a successful multi-band tour in support of the band Status Quo, the band recorded the album Jailbreak, which is classic. It proved to be their breakthrough record. It was released on March 26th, 1976. There you go. And it featured the worldwide hit, The Boys Are Back in Town, which reached number 8 in the UK. And surprisingly, I thought it was a little higher here, but number 12 in the United States. Their first charting record in America, Okay, I thought it got a little higher than that, but it was only number 12. The album also charted well on both sides of the Atlantic, reaching number 10 in the UK and number 18 in the United States. It did well on the album charts here.
Okay? Yeah, it really did. Especially that song, "The Boys Are Back in Town."
Oh, yeah. I mean, you still hear that today.
Oh, yeah, everybody loves that song.
Yeah, yeah. The album also charted, like I said, on both sides of the Atlantic. And then the follow-up single was called Jailbreak, the title track. And that did okay. The twin guitar sound at that point had been fully developed.
Yeah.
And, it was on evidence of it throughout the whole album. Songs like Emerald, Warriors, Cowboy Song, which is one of my favorites from them. The album is considered to have financially secured the band. Okay, wow. So it's what made them able to push forward and continue to record and not have to worry about money so much.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So, the Lynott felt that he needed to experiment also with like higher concept albums and things like that. He was interested in his lyrics and being a little deeper than Boys Are Back in Town.
Yeah.
So what would happen is he ended up at that point like becoming very prolific with his lyrics. He would have a book and write constantly in lyrics in the book and things like that. Now, Thin Lizzy toured the U.S. in support of various bands like Aerosmith, Rush, REO Speedwagon, who were all huge at that point. And they planned to tour there again in June of 76 with Rainbow, who were very popular at that time. However, Phil Lynott fell ill with hepatitis and the tour was canceled, which set them back a few months.
Yeah.
While Lynott was ill, though, it didn't stop him. He wrote most of the following album called Johnny the Fox. The album was recorded in August of 76, and the sessions began to reveal tensions between Phil Lynott and guitarist Brian Robertson. Okay. For example, there was a disagreement over the who wrote the song "Don't Believe a Word." It was a hit single.
Yeah.
And Lynott said that he was drawing from Celtic mythology and his own personal experience for lyric ideas during the album for Johnny the Fox. Okay. And other albums also, what he was recording. Robinson had issue with it. He claimed he wrote that song. Okay. So, anyway, that was creating more tension within the band. The tour to support that album was very successful. And they were further high-profile TV appearances, such as they appeared on the Rod Stewart BBC TV special that year. Okay, an important tour of the U.S. in December of 76 had to be canceled when Brian Robertson's hand was injured by a broken bottle fight at the Speakeasy Club in London the night before the band was due to fly. Robinson maintains that he was not lumped up at the time, okay, and he had gone there simply just for a meal, all right. Phil Lynott was angry and replaced Robertson with Gary Moore for another tour of the States in January.
Oh, so he came back to the band.
What's that?
Gary Moore came back.
Yes, briefly, okay.
Yeah.
That tour in the U.S., they were opening for Queen.
Wow.
The tour Robinson had, the tour was a success, and Lynott asked Moore to stay on, but he didn't want to. He went back to his Coliseum 2 band.
Yeah.
And Robertson had not really been fired from the band, but was unsure of his position at that point. Okay, and he made plans to start another band with Jimmy Bain of Rainbow. Before the American tour, Lynott had also invited the Irish guitarist Jimmy Slevin to try out a few things and feel it out with Thin Lizzy, prompting speculation that the ex-Skid Row member could replace Robertson. Robertson still was technically part of the band.
Yeah, he never got fired. He just
not really. Okay, it just was kind of on hiatus with them. Thin Lizzy would fly to Canada in May of 77 as a trio to record the album Bad Reputation, with Scott Gorham handling all the guitar parts.
Wow.
Okay. A month into the sessions, at Scott Gorham's urging, Robertson came back to the band. Okay. But he came back in his own words, as a session player or as a guest.
Mm.
Okay. Robertson added lead guitar tracks to 3 songs, as well as rhythm and keyboards as well, and was officially reinstated in July. Okay. So they worked things out at least for a while. The album was released in September and sold well, reaching number 4 in the UK after a successful single, Dancing in the Moonlight. It's Caught Me in the Spotlight. That's the name of the song, Dancing in the Moonlight. Also in 1977, Thin Lizzy headlined the Reading Festival and played Dallamount Park on August 21st. Now we're getting into 78. They released their first live album called Live and Dangerous. And there was some controversy over actually how much of it was live.
Oh, they thought it was not live?
Well, the producer, Tony Visconti, who was very well known, he had worked with Bowie and T-Rex and stuff like that, claimed that only parts that were not overdubbed were the drums and the audience. Okay. However, Brian Robertson disputes this, saying that he had refused Lynott's request to re-record a guitar solo and that the only overdubs were backing vocals and some guitar parts by Gorham. He added, "It's just not true. The only reason we said that it was recorded all over was obviously for tax reasons. So everything that Visconti claims is bollocks." Gorham concurs. He's basically saying that, they said that they recorded it over to get a break on their taxes somehow.
Yeah.
Okay. Scott Gorham concurs, stating that he attempted to re-record a solo but could not recreate that live sound, adding, "I redid one rhythm track and a few backing vocals, but that's it. The album was a huge success, reaching number 2 in the UK and was ranked as the best live album of all time by Classic Rock magazine in 2004. I would say that's debatable, but it is a very good live record.
Oh, it is?
Which we might talk about at some point later this year.
Yeah, was that it hasn't been on our list yet, right?
No. And I'm thinking of doing something on it. So the permanent departure of Brian Robertson would happen after a gig in Ibiza on July 6, 1978. Everything had reached a breaking point, and he had actually teamed up with Jimmy Bain of Rainbow to start a new band called Wild Horses.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he was out. Again, replaced by Gary Moore. Moore would come back, okay? And around this time, well, he was always the guy that, would join up with him at least for a little bit because he knew him for so long.
Yeah.
It was at this time that Phil Lynott joined forces with Steve Jones and Paul Cook of the Sex Pistols, and also with Chris Spedding and Jimmy Bain to form a band called the Greedy Bastards. And they played a small number of gigs with a wide selection of songs. In this way, Lynott was able to align his band with the punk movement, because Thin Lizzy was one of these bands that the punks kind of had respect for. Okay. Motorhead would be another one.
Yeah.
And there actually is a Motorhead Thin Lizzy connection. In 1983, a few years after Brian Robertson was out of Thin Lizzy, he would join Motorhead for the album Another Perfect Day.
Wow.
Okay. And I don't know, Brian Robertson was a character. He didn't fit in Motorhead at all. Okay. He great guitarist and a very good Motorhead album that's for years was kind of overlooked and forgotten by the band. They, Lemmy just cut out all songs from that album in the live set, but they started to bring it back in the years before Lemmy passed away, because there was some great songs on there. Brian Robertson brought a lot to the band, but visually he looked like an idiot because he would come out on stage in like bright colored shorts and stuff like that, and it just didn't work with Lemmy's bullet belt and cowboy boots. And it didn't work with that. Okay.
Shorts.
Yeah. Now, there were sometimes some different lineup changes in the Greedy Bastards. Bob Geldof played with them briefly. The band began another tour of the U.S. in August of 78, followed by a trip to Australia and New Zealand. Brian Downey did not accompany them on this tour, having contracted pneumonia and preferring to spend some time in Ireland. He was replaced for the tour by American drummer Mark Nossif, Now, on their return, Brian Downey would rejoin the band at the beginning of '79, and they recorded the album Black Rose, a rock legend in Paris.
Yeah.
The sessions were marked by the increasing drug habits of Phil Lynott and Scott Gorham.
Hanging on top.
Yeah, and the general presence of drugs all over the place around the band. Okay. This also showed in the subject matter on the album. There's a song called Gotta Give It Up. Okay. A lot of Celtic influences remained, however, particularly in the album closer called Rosine. I'm not going to say the Gaelic, Rosine Dub, because I can't speak Gaelic. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but that was the title. It was a 7-minute medley of traditional Irish songs, given a twin guitar rock sound on top of it. 2 singles, Waiting for an Alibi and Do Anything You Want To, was successful, and the album reached number 2 in the UK, and it was a third moderately successful single called Sarah, which was Lynott's ode to his newborn daughter. However, on the 4th of July, 1979, after playing their Day on the Green set in Oakland, Gary Moore abruptly left Thin Lizzy in the middle of another tour. Years later, Moore said he had no regrets about walking out, but maybe it was the wrong way to do it. He said he could have done it differently, but he said he just had to leave the band. He subsequently pursued his solo career, releasing several successful albums. He had collaborated with Phil Lynott and Downey on his 1978 album called Back on the Streets and the hit single Parisian Walkways before leaving Thin Lizzy. And then in 1985, he and Lynott teamed up again on the UK number 5 single Out in the Fields. Gary Moore would die of a heart attack in Spain on the 6th of February, 2011 at age 58. After Gary Moore's departure, Thin Lizzy continued the tour for a few nights as a trio before Lynott brought in Midge Ure to replace him on a temporary basis. Midge Ure had prior plans to join Ultravox. That's the band he's known for, okay? But had co-written a song called Get Out of Here with Lynott on Black Rose, a rock legend, and agreed to help Thin Lizzy complete their touring commitments. He also contributed guitar parts for the continuing saga of the Aging Orphans, a compilation album of remixed and overdubbed versions of Eric Bell Eric tracks. On their return to the UK, the band would have headlined the Reading Festival for the second time on August 25th, 1979, but had to cancel due to this disruption within the lineup. Before a tour of Japan beginning in September, Lynott decided to bring in another guitarist, Dave Flett, who had toured with Manfred Mann's Earth Band, to enable to switch to playing keyboards when necessary. The tour was completely successful, but the lineup now contained of 2 temporary members.
Yeah.
Lynott was spending a lot of time on projects outside Thin Lizzy, including composing and producing material for other bands, as well as putting together his first solo album called Solo in Soho. Lynott also reactivated at that point the Greedy Bastards, who released a one-off single, A Merry Jingle, in December of '79 as simply called The Greedies. That's a famous Christmas song.
Yeah.
I wish you a Merry Christmas, but it's done like sort of like a punk sound a little bit. Yeah. Okay. With the group now composed of Lynott, Gorham, and Downey, with Sex Pistols, Jones, and Cook, that single of the Christmas song got to number 28 in the UK.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Now, while Lynott searched for a permanent guitarist, he and other members of Thin Lizzy, past and present, worked in Solo in Soho, which was released in April of 1980, and the next Thin Lizzy album called Chinatown. Lynott got married on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, and his wife gave birth to a second daughter in July. Dave Flett had hoped to be made a permanent member of Thin Lizzy, but Lynott chose Snowy White, who had played with Pink Floyd and Peter Green. Ure was still acting as a temporary keyboard player at gigs during early 1980, but was replaced by Darren Wharton in April. Shortly after White joined the band, Wharton was only 18 at the time and was initially hired on a temporary basis. This new lineup completed the Chinatown album between short tours, and 2 singles were released from it. The first song was Chinatown, okay, this is the title track, and that got to number 21 in the UK. But the second single, Killer on the Loose, got to the top 10, basically because it was about the ongoing activities of serial killer Peter Sutcliffe, who was known as the Yorkshire Ripper at the time.
Wow.
Okay, so they wrote a song about an ongoing serial killer that was still active. Chinatown was finally released in October of 1980 and reached number 7 in the UK, but by this time, Thin Lizzy's albums were not even reaching the top 100 in the US.
Wow.
After a successful tour of Japan and Australia, the band undertook was to be their final US tour in late of 1980. At the beginning of 81, Lynott began working on his second solo album using Thin Lizzy members among a large group of backing musicians. Around the same time, the band recorded material for the next Thin Lizzy album, and as before, the sessions seemed to merge to the extent that musicians were not always sure which album they were working on. Okay, so a lot of confusion going on there. Producer for the Thin Lizzy album sessions, Chris Sangarides, stated that the feeling of confusion was in the air in that sometimes nobody knew if they were working on a solo record of Phil's or an actual Thin Lizzy album.
That must have been confusing.
I'm sure it was. Snowy White had previously felt that as a member of Thin Lizzy, he should have been paid as a session player to appear on Lynott's solo recordings. In April of 81, the band's first greatest hits album was released, The Adventures of Thin Lizzy, got to number 6 in the UK, and there was a standalone single from that album called Trouble Boys, which only reached number 53, the band's worst chart placing since 1975.
Wow.
According to Snowy White and Wharton, Lynott was the only person who wanted to release it. Nobody else liked the song. Trouble Boys had even been penciled in as the title for the new album, but the single's chart failure resulted in the song being dropped from the album, and the title actually changed for the album to Renegade. One highlight for the band at this time was headlining the first ever Slane Castle concert on August 16th with support from Kirsty MacColl, Hazel O'Connor, and a little-known Irish band at the time called U2. Lynott's second solo album, the Philip Lynott album, was delayed until 1982 while Renegade was completed and released in November of 81. Renegade was not successful, only reaching number 38 in the UK and number 157 in the US. A single called Hollywood, Down on Your Luck, flopped, and but for some reason it actually reached number 24 on the US mainstream rock charts. Only 2 songs from the album were written solely by Lynott, with the other members of the band contributing more to the compositions. Both Scott Gorham and Wharton have since stated that their dissatisfaction with some of the songs, such as Angel of Death, Fats, and Mexican Blood. Now, Wharton was omitted from the band photos on the back of the record sleeve, despite the fact that he was by this time a permanent member. And
wow.
That was a very hurtful thing he said that Lynott had done.
Why did they do that to him?
Probably just wasn't, they weren't getting along.
Yeah, probably.
It really was Lynott's band, you know, for the most part. And Gorham, Now, the beginning of 82 was marred by both Downey and Gorham having to take breaks from the European tour to recover from personal problems. You know what that is. Downey was involved in a fight in a nightclub in Denmark in February. Yeah. And Scott Gorham was suffering from drug-induced exhaustion. Downey missed 5 concerts and was replaced by Mark Norsif again for 3 of them, and by Mike Mesbah of support band The Lookalikes for the other 2. In March, Scott Gorham collapsed and returned home. 8 concerts were performed as a quartet, and 6 others were postponed.
Wow.
Later in the year, Lynott went on a solo tour and released his solo album, which did not sell particularly well. White left the band in August of 82, having tired of the chaos in the band, and particularly Lynott's drug problems. White went on to achieve top 10 chart success in the UK with his single Bird of Paradise in 1983. Wow. Longtime co-manager Chris O'Donnell also left at this time, later stating, "A once brilliant band was turning to crap before my eyes." Kind of sad,
It happens.
Yeah. Now, Lynott wanted to find a replacement for White before starting to record a new album, which would turn out to be the band's last. By September 82, after some unsuccessful rehearsals with Dutch guitarist Adrian Vandenberg, he had settled on John Sykes, who had been a member of Tigers of Pantang, and he co-wrote the first single from the album, Cold Sweat, although the rest of the album had already been written Thunder and Lightning was released in March of '83 and was much more successful than its predecessor, reaching number 4 in the UK. John Sykes' presence had rejuvenated the band musically. The composing credits were evenly shared, and the style had grown much heavier, veering towards heavy metal. Not sure if you caught it, but John Sykes died last month in January.
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah, I think it was about. Yeah, I had put it up on my Facebook. I had put it up on my Facebook. I guess I missed it, but he was. I think he was about 65, and a lot of people wrote some nice stuff, in the comments about him and everything, and mentioned that he, was in Thin Lizzy. The tour to support the album turned out to be a farewell tour. Lynott was not convinced that this would be the end of the band, however. Sykes wanted to continue, although Gorham at that point had had enough. The tour was successful, and some concerts were recorded to compile a live album. Partway into the tour, many of Thin Lizzy's past guitarists.
Posey, I gotta grab something from outside real quick. There's somebody at my door real quick. I'll be back in like 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Okay. So take a little break. We'll leave it on until we call, and then we start. Just start it where you left off, but I can edit it.
Hello?
Yep. Oh, there we go. Oh.
Yeah. Rob, hold on a second.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Can you hold on 1 second? Rob, I got to take this call. Hold on.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Take care. Bye. So I got this endocrinologist I see now deal with my diabetes and other shit, and she's a total piece of ass.
Yeah.
And her office just called me, and they do everything great. All my prescriptions are going under her now, and And yesterday I was like in the office, and she just looks so fucking good, man. I was like, holy shit. All right. Okay. So the toss of the support of that album, Thunder and Lightning, turned out to really be a farewell tour. Lynott, though, was convinced that the band could go on, okay, but Sykes wanted to continue in the band, but Scott Gorham had enough of everything. Yeah. So the tour was actually very successful, and some concerts were recorded to compile a live album. Now, partway into the tour, many of Thin Lizzy's prior guitarists would come up on stage and, play with them. The album was released in October of 1983 as Life, okay, which included an older performance of Renegade featuring White, who I'm talking about the live album, okay?
Yeah.
Life. And Snowy White was one of these guitarists that didn't come up on stage. So they actually used like an older performance of his that was recorded of the song Renegade and stuck that on the album.
Oh.
And it reached number 29 in the UK. The tour continued while 2 more singles were released. The last of them, The Sun Goes Down, only reaching number 52 in August of that year. Lynott also undertook another solo tour, accompanied by Downey and Sykes under the name The Three Musketeers.
Huh.
Now, after a difficult leg of the tour in Japan, where some members of the band had difficulty obtaining heroin, they were becoming a band like that, okay. Thin Lizzy played their final UK concert before their breakup at the Reading Festival on August 28, 1983, which was eventually released all the way in 1992 as their BBC Radio 1 Live in Concert album.
Wow.
The last concert came in Nuremberg, Germany on September 4th at the Monsters of Rock Festival, after which the band members went their separate ways. Now, Lynott would start a band called Grand Slam in by the end of '83.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, that they never could get a record deal, and it really only lasted about 2 years. Sykes and Downey had agreed to be part of the band, but John Sykes in the mid '80s ended up joining Whitesnake. Okay, he was part of Whitesnake with that whole that whole time.
He's the one that just died, right? He died too, right?
Who?
John Sykes.
Earlier. Yeah, I told you. Yeah. John Sykes died in January of 25.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Lynott became obviously more into his solo career, and he enjoyed a number 5 hit single called Out in the Fields that was with Gary Moore in 1985. The song was composed by Moore and was taken from his solo album called Run for Cover, which featured various contributions from Phil Lynott on that album. Lynott's solo efforts did not fare so well, really, though, and his last single, 19, only reached number 76 in the UK. Now, before his death, Lynott was planning a 3rd solo album and had spoken to Downey about a possible reformation of Thin Lizzy around that time with Gorham and Sykes, and had booked studio time for January of that year. It obviously wasn't going to happen. Okay. Let me just get into his towards the end of his life here. Okay. Yeah, obviously his final years were really racked with drug abuse and alcohol abuse as well. No matter what he did with musically, there was always that problem in the background holding him back. He collapsed on December 25th, Christmas in 1985 at his home in Kew, okay, which I believe is in Ireland. He was discovered by his mom.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And she didn't know about his heroin addiction. Now, I've read stories that, he used to hide his heroin addiction. He would shoot dope between his toes.
Yeah.
He was doing that.
Yeah.
Really bad. So.
But you know what? He was probably one of those guys that was functioning heroin addict.
Well, he was for a while, I mean, if you have, Keith Richards is a perfect example. Yeah. If you have all that money and you don't have to go on the street for it. Okay, you get people to do it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, you can live a long time as long as you don't overdose for some reason. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, Richards was doing it through the 70s, basically.
Yeah.
So his mom contacted Phil's wife, Caroline, and who knew about his drug addiction. Okay, and knew that, you know, this situation, he's still alive, but he had collapsed. Okay, she drove him to a drug clinic at Cloud's house in East Noyle near Shaftesbury. He was taken to Salisbury Infirmary, where he was diagnosed as suffering from septicemia, which I think is like a sepsis type thing. Okay, like a blood infection. Okay. Although he regained consciousness enough to speak to his mother, his condition worsened by the start of the new year, and he was put on a ventilator.
Yeah.
He died of pneumonia and heart failure due to septicemia on January 4th, 1986, at the age of 36. Lynott's funeral was held at St. Elizabeth's Church in Richmond on January 9th, with most of Thin Lizzy's ex-members in attendance, followed by a second service at Howth Parish Church near Dublin on the 11th of January. And he's buried in St. Fintan's Cemetery in Sutton, County Dublin. Okay.
They also got a statue of him up out there somewhere.
Yes, there is. There's a great statue of him up in Dublin.
Yeah.
You know, he was an Irish hero. This half black guy. All right, you know, he mixed race Irishman, and you know, he really moved a lot of people. Then Lizzie regrouped actually for a one-off performance in 1986 with Bob Geldof taking lead vocals, and they reformed 10 years later in 1996 as a touring act. And then in 2012, the members of Thin Lizzy decided to record new material, but chose to do so under the name of Black Star Riders, as they and Lynott's widow felt uncomfortable about new Thin Lizzy recordings without Lynott. So they just went under a different name. Okay. Now, every January from 1987 to 2019, with a final event in 2023, Lynott's friend, Smiley Bolger, hosted a festival for him on the anniversary of his death called The Vibe for Philo. A number of musicians performed at the festival, including Thin Lizzy tribute bands and occasionally former Thin Lizzy members themselves.
Wow.
Yeah. Both Lynott and Thin Lizzy's back catalogs have been re-released in expanded editions. In April of 2007, the 1996 film The Rocker, a portrait of Phil Lynott, which consisted mainly of archive footage, was released on DVD in the UK. In August 2010, Yellow Pearl was released. This is a collection of songs from Lynott's solo album, B-sides, and album tracks. On January 4th, 1994, a trust in Lynott's name was formed by his family and friends to provide scholarship for new musicians and to make donations to charities and organizations in Phil's memory. Lynott always struggled and to come to terms with the death of her son. Okay, she would visit his grave often. There was a little controversy, if you remember, in September of 2012 when Mitt Romney was running for president. He was using "Boys Are Back in Town."
Oh yeah.
They put the kibosh on that. She asked him not to do that. Okay, so and it had to do with she said that Mitt Romney was against gay marriage and Phil would be for that, so don't use the song. So you mentioned the statue. In 2005, a life-size bronze statue of Phil Lynott by Dublin sculptor Paul Daly was unveiled on Harry Street, off Grafton Street in central Dublin. The ceremony was attended by Lynott's mom, Philomena, who had worked with the Roisin Dub Trust on the campaign for the status, and by former band members Moore, Bell, even Brian Robertson, Downey, Gorham, and Darren Wharton, who performed live. On October 3rd, 2019, Ann Post released 2 commemorative stamps. I believe that's the Irish Post Office. And on Post, it's called. Released 2 commemorative stamps with artwork by Jim Fitzpatrick, one of the Black Rose album cover and one a portrait of Lynott. They were launched in the UK by Lynott's children and his ex-wife. On the 27th of November 2019, the Central Bank of Ireland issued 3,000 pound 15 notes and also a silver commemorative coin as part of the Modern Irish Musicians series, commemorating the 70th anniversary of Lynott's birth in 1949. On December 20th, 2020, December 17th, 2020, a plaque was unveiled at his childhood home on Leyland Road in Crumlin. There's a couple of good books about him. One in particular is called Phil Lynott, Still in Love with You, and by Niall Stokes. There's also one authorized by the Lynott family called Cowboy Song that was released in 2016. Phil Lynott, The Rocker by Mark Putterford. Phil Lynott, Renegade of Thin Lizzy by Alan Bird. The Ballad of Thin Mark, the authorized biography of Phil Lynott and Thin Lizzy by Stuart Bailey. And Lynott's mother, Philomena, published My Boy, the Philip Lynott story, an autobiographical volume with a lot of stuff that we didn't even talk about here. Okay, on Phil. Okay. That's basically it. I mean, his style and legacy continues to this day. Thin Lizzy songs have been covered by Metallica, Iron Maiden,
a bunch of people.
Anthrax, the Super Suckers did a great cover of Cowboy Song. They've influenced so many people. When Metallica covered Whiskey in the Jar, I thought it was a pretty good version.
Yeah.
They did it to honor Cliff Burton, who was their bass player, who passed away. And Thin Lizzy was Cliff's favorite band.
Wow.
Okay. So, the Guns N' Roses covered, I think Guns N' Roses did a Thin Lizzy song too. I think they did. I'm trying to remember. Okay. Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. The title was a kind of a tribute to Thin Lizzy in the sense that they had titles like that, in their songs and stuff like that. That's basically it. I mean, he's, like I said, he was a mixed race, half black, half Irish kid that rose to the top of the world. Sadly, he had some demons that would take him out, but a legacy that exists to this day. He has statues of him. He has plaques of him. I would say his life was a success,
Yeah, even for such a short life, he did a lot, man.
Right. But he really did. For a short time that he was with us.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting, too, because they kind of broke up at the time of the beginning of MTV. I think had they lasted another 5 years or something, they probably really would have been a lot bigger.
Yeah, and it would have been all over MTV because those are the kind of bands they like.
Yeah. Thin Lizzy got a little airplay on MTV, but it was more like, I think after they broke up, there was some promos and things like that. But, they really didn't have that exposure. They kind of just missed it by a year or two, basically. So, okay. So that's the first part of our Black History Month celebration for February of 2025. Stay tuned for the next podcast in about 2 weeks, where we'll have a great show about Stax Records, record label, that brought a lot of great blues music to the masses. Okay. Started the careers of Isaac Hayes and Sam and Dave. Sam Moore just passed away in January also. Soul Man, Stax, I can't wait to talk about that. That's a great story, how that all went down and the amount of influence they had on music.
Oh, of course, they were huge influence, man. They had a lot of people came through that too. A lot of when we talk about, it's going to be pretty damn interesting.
Yeah, I'd say so. All right, Rob. So another great show. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay tuned for the Stax Records show in about 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks for Black History Month, we always do
2 shows.
So yep. Are we going to do a conspiracy or one of those for Black History?
For conspiracy, I don't think so this time around. I might come up with something if we have time, but I wasn't planning that. we'll see what happens.
And I got a bunch. What's the new show that's coming out that we're working on?
Yeah. Probably by the time this is up, we should be ready to put out the new series we're having called I Am Right. It's a roundtable type discussion show. We're going to talk about all different things with Eric Moore and our buddy Knowledge, two international bar alumni. We'll be all talking here, maybe sharing a drink remotely or something. Never know.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 or 4. And, getting into all kinds of things. It will be political. It'll be also other discussions. So that should be good. I'm looking forward to that. I think that show's going to be successful.
Yeah, it should be. All right. So what do we do here?
We don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
Take care, people.
It is that time now once again, for getting lumped up with my friends. It's Rock and Mike and Rob that you should know, and you'll find them here on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show. time now once again for getting lumped up with my friends. It's Rock and Mike and Rob that you should know, and you'll find them here on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show.